34 years ago, a white Atlanta executive walked out of a hospital room and left behind a black woman and a newborn daughter who had her eyes. He signed a check he thought would buy his silence. The check was never cashed. The letters she wrote him were never answered. And the daughter he abandoned grew up to become the only person in the world with the power to destroy him or to save him. Last Tuesday morning, she walked into his boardroom as the new CEO. He recognized her mother's eyes before he recognized his own daughter. To understand why that moment mattered, why his coffee cup froze halfway to his lips, why his wife turned pale beside him, why the next 80 seconds would unravel 34 years of careful, expensive silence. You have to go back to the night he made his choice, and you have to understand the night she was born. It was a clear, brittle Tuesday in April 2024 when the elevator doors of the Caldwell Tower opened onto the 32nd floor. Nathaniel Caldwell III, known in Atlanta business pages as the Old Man, stood waiting to greet the woman the board had hired to save his father's company. He was 71, silver-haired, soft around the jaw. His blue eyes had a practiced warmth that had closed 1,000 deals and buried 1,000 truths. Beside him stood his wife Catherine, 68, in a cream blazer, her pearls catching the morning light. They looked, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution had once written, like a portrait of a dynasty made flesh. But the dynasty was dying. 3 consecutive quarters of missed forecasts, a regulatory investigation into the flagship hospital division, a leaked memo suggesting the founder's grandson had authorized sweetheart contracts to his daughter's wedding planner. The board had finally done the unthinkable. They had gone outside the family. They had hired a turnaround CEO from across the country. And not one of them, not even the chairman, had thought to mention to Nathaniel that the woman they had chosen was, by every metric that mattered, the most formidable operator in American corporate healthcare. The elevator chimed. The doors slid open. She stepped out in a navy suit, single strand of pearls, heels sharp enough to crack marble. Her hair was pulled back in a low knot. Her skin was a deep, burnished brown. Her eyes, almond-shaped, faintly gold, edged with the kind of quiet fury that only 34 years of practice can teach, swept the lobby once and twice and stopped on Nathaniel's face. His coffee cup froze halfway to his mouth. A bead of brown liquid trembled over the rim and fell in slow motion onto the cream carpet. Catherine's hand went to her pearls. Nathaniel's throat made a sound that was not a word, something primal, something like recognition ripping through bone. He had seen those eyes before. 34 years and 10,000 mornings ago, he had seen them across a hospital bed, peering up at him from a wrinkled newborn face. And now, they were here, in his lobby, in his building, at the exact moment when his empire was about to be handed to a stranger. He did not know her name yet. But somewhere in the marrow of him, in the place where the things we bury never stop breathing, the past had already begun to climb out of the grave. To understand how Nathaniel Caldwell arrived at that lobby, you have to go back to the fall of 1989. Back when he was 36, the rising star of a Southern pharmaceutical dynasty and the kind of man who had been told since birth that he was born to inherit. He had also, against every law of his upbringing, fallen in love. She was Joelle, 26, a graduate student in public health at Emory, 3 years into a study on black maternal mortality that nobody wanted to fund. She had come up to him at a benefits gala and asked him, politely, then not politely at all, why his family's foundation had stopped writing checks to Grady Hospital. He had laughed. Then he had asked her to dinner. They were careful for 2 years. They were not careful enough. The pregnancy came in October. Joelle told him on a Sunday afternoon in his Piedmont Park apartment, her hands folded in her lap like a supplicant at a trial she already knew she had lost. He did not speak. He drove home. He picked up the phone and dialed his father. His mother answered on the second ring. "Nathaniel, whatever it is, we'll fix it. But if it involves that girl, fix it quietly. Mother, I know what you think. His mother's voice dropped to the temperature of a surgical instrument. Your father is in the study. Hold the line. He heard the receiver set down on a marble side table. He heard his mother's heels click against the parquet. 5, 6, 7 steps. He heard a door. He heard her voice, muffled, low. Then his father came on the line. Nat. Sir, Joelle is pregnant. The line went silent for 9 seconds. He counted them. Then his father said, very softly, come to the house. Tonight. He drove to Druid Hills in the dark. He sat in his father's study under the oil portrait of his grandfather, while his mother stood at the window with her arms crossed. His father sat behind the desk. He did not raise his voice once. You have 2 paths, son. You can do the right thing by her, and you can hand me the keys to the company on Monday morning. Or you can do the right thing by this family, and I will arrange the situation quietly. You will never speak to her again. You will never see the child. And in 3 months, you will marry Catherine Whitfield, who has been raised to stand beside you in rooms like this one. Sir, I did not ask for a response. His mother turned from the window. You will not bring that child into this family, Nathaniel. Not now, not ever. We will not have it. He sat in that chair for 45 minutes. He did not argue. He did not cry. He drove back to Piedmont Park in the dark. He did not go upstairs. He slept in the car. Joelle went into labor on a Tuesday morning in late March 1990. Nathaniel drove her to Piedmont himself, hands white on the steering wheel, his heart slamming against his ribs so hard he thought it would crack a rib. He stayed with her through 11 hours of labor. He held her hand so tight she lost feeling in her fingers. He watched the obstetrician's face go tight as the baby's head emerged. And then he heard the cry, that enormous, ragged, indignant cry of a child arriving into a world that had not decided whether to love her. The nurse placed the newborn on Joelle's chest. She had her father's chin. She had her mother's eyes. She had Nathaniel's fingerprints curled around Joelle's index finger, and she was so small he could not believe she was real. His father was waiting in the corridor. The settlement arrived by courier 2 hours later. $500,000, legal severances, a non-disclosure, a signature line. Nathaniel read it in a hallway chair while his daughter slept in a bassinet 20 feet away. His hands trembled so badly the page rattled. Catherine was waiting in his father's Cadillac at the hospital entrance. She did not ask what was happening on the 3rd floor. She did not need to. She had been raised, as his mother had said, to stand beside him in rooms like that one. And the morning after the settlement, when Nathaniel came home smelling of hospital soap and old guilt, she poured him a bourbon and said only one sentence. Whatever you had to do, you did the right thing. Now wash your hands. We're having the Hendersons for dinner. He walked down the corridor with the check folded into his breast pocket. His father stepped out of the elevator alone, holding the door for his son. Their eyes met. Thank you, sir. His father said nothing. He pressed the folded check into the old man's palm. The doors closed. His daughter began to cry again, that enormous, ragged sound, audible from down the block, he would tell himself for years, from another lifetime. He went home. He took a shower. He had a drink. By morning, the baby's face was already blurring at the edges of his memory. By the wedding rehearsal 3 months later, it was almost gone. Almost. Joelle brought her daughter home to a 1-bedroom apartment on the west side of Atlanta, 3 buses from the hospital where she had been born. She framed the check Nathaniel had left. Never cashed, never deposited, the ink dried brown at the edges, and hung it above the kitchen sink. Every morning, while she boiled water for oatmeal, she looked up at it and remembered. She remembered the signature. She remembered the elevator. She remembered the almost Sloan, though Joelle had given her only her own surname, refusing to let her carry even the shape of the man who had walked away. Grew up on that west side block, in that 1-bedroom apartment, in the long shadow of a check that never cleared. Joelle finished her degree at night. She took a job as a hospital administrator at a public clinic in College Park. She paid rent on Wednesdays and lights on Fridays and parish school tuition with the last check of every month. She told her daughter the truth about her father on the day she turned 9. He had a choice, Joelle said. He chose something else. That's not about you. That's about him. You're going to build something they cannot take away. The world did not make it easy. Letters went unanswered. Scholarship letters, request letters, the small, desperate letters Joelle kept writing to foundations that would not fund a single black mother in Atlanta with a half-white child and no ring. Doors closed for reasons Sloan was not supposed to name. Bernice Holloway, the church mother from Greater Mount Pleasant Baptist on Ashby, saw what was happening and walked into their lives like a wall. She drove Sloan to her first interview at a private academy in Buckhead. She sat in the principal's lobby with her church hat still on. When the secretary came out with the polite refusal, Bernice did not stand. "Honey," she said, her voice warm as Sunday gravy, "I have been a donor to this school for 19 years. I have placed 11 children through your doors. I have never once been told a child of mine was not a fit. So before you hand me that letter, I want you to walk back into that office, and I want you to tell the headmaster that Bernice Holloway is sitting in his lobby and that she would very much like to understand what kind of fit her girl did not meet. You take your time, baby. I am not going anywhere." The secretary went back inside. 23 minutes later, Sloan had a desk. Bernice drove her to debate tournaments. She put her on the church prayer list when the rent came up short. She held Joelle's hand the night Sloan got into Wharton on a full ride and cried in a bathroom stall for 20 minutes because she had believed in this child from the day she met her. Joelle died in 2014, ovarian cancer. Sloan was 24, just back from a fellowship in Geneva, still paying her mother's co-pays on a salary that should not have had to stretch that far. In the last week, while morphine drifted through Joelle's veins and her breath grew shallow, she pressed a box into Sloan's hands. Inside, the check. The letters Sloan had written to her father between the ages of 7 and 11, never sent. And one envelope in her mother's careful handwriting. Inside that envelope, a single page. "Do not let him forget what he threw away, but do not become what he was. Build. Then come back. And when you come back, do not let him call it revenge. Let him call it the truth." Sloan kept the box. She framed the check alongside her mother's death certificate. She had the loop of the G and girl tattooed across her left wrist in her mother's handwriting. For years, she did not look back. Wharton was not kind. Sloan remembered the second interview, the one with the alumni committee, because the man across the table kept glancing at the photograph on his own desk and then back at her face. She had been warned by the only other black girl in her prep class that this was how it happened, not with a no, with a hesitation so polite you could not call it a wall. He had asked her about her diversity narrative. He had asked her how she would contribute to campus culture. He had asked her, with the careful sincerity of a man who believed he was being generous, whether she had considered applying to a school where she might be less of a minority. She had not flinched. She had smiled the smile her mother had taught her, the one that said, "I see you, and I am going to remember this." She had answered every question. She had walked out, gotten on the train, opened her acceptance email 4 days later, and cried on the upper deck of a SEPTA car because her mother had been right. Doors did not open. Doors were picked. She picked them for the next decade. McKinsey, where she was once mistaken for the client's caterer at a partner dinner. Mass General, where she rebuilt a pediatric unit on a budget the chairman had told her was impossible. A Harvard MBA on a merit scholarship. The same committee, she noted, that had asked her about her diversity narrative 5 years earlier, sent her a handwritten note when she graduated top of her section. She rose to vice president at a regional hospital network at 28. To senior partner at a private equity firm specializing in distressed healthcare assets at 31. By 34, Sloan had earned the reputation of being the woman you called when a legacy system was bleeding out, and you had 6 months to stop it. She did not think about her father often. She thought about him the way you think about a building you once lived in, with the dull, certain knowledge of where the stairwells were, where the cracks in the foundation had always been, and what it would have felt like if any of the lights had worked. Then, in the winter of 2023, the board of the Caldwell Group, yes, that Caldwell Group, the one founded by her grandfather on segregated contracts, expanded by her father, now bleeding through 3 consecutive quarters, posted the CEO's seat externally for the first time in company history. The chairman called her on a Thursday. By Friday, Sloan had read the charter. By Saturday, she had read the founding documents. By Sunday night, she had a single line highlighted in yellow across the bottom of her father's signature. She did not accept the role for the money. She did not accept it for the title. She accepted it because she knew, with the same marrow certainty her father had felt in that elevator lobby, that the company her grandfather had built on the bones of black patients at Grady was now in the hands of a man who had walked out on a black woman and her child 3 decades earlier. She was going to make sure that man answered, not in a courtroom, not in the tabloids, in a boardroom where it would cost him everything. She bought 3 new suits. She reread her mother's letter 9 times. She flew to Atlanta, and in the back of her mind, a sentence her mother had whispered through a morphine haze settled into the shape of a prayer. Let him call it the truth. The conference room on the 32nd floor of the Caldwell Tower was paneled in walnut. 11 directors sat around the mahogany table. Nathaniel sat at the far end, his hands folded, his smile pinned in place. Catherine had driven home 20 minutes earlier with a headache. Sloan sat at the other end of the table, the agenda open in front of her, the framed checks still in the leather bag at her feet. She had not yet shown them. She started with the work. For 91 minutes, she did exactly what the board had hired her to do. She walked them, line by line, through the structural failures of the Caldwell Group, the underperforming hospital contracts, the deferred maintenance backlog, the regulatory fines buried in subsidiaries that nobody on the board had ever bothered to audit. She forced Nathaniel on camera to defend his signature on 3 separate acquisition approvals that had hemorrhaged money. She made him, in front of the entire board, initial a draft memorandum authorizing the divestiture of the cardiology unit he had personally championed. He signed. He did not know why. The room was moving too slowly. The eyes across the table were pulling every thought he had out of him like a thread. When the room emptied to its 3 most senior directors, she closed her folder. "One more item," she said. She reached into the leather bag. She lifted out the check. She set it very softly on the walnut, the inked signature facing the chairman. "Do you recognize this, Mr. Caldwell?" He looked at it. The brown, dried-out edge of a check that had been framed above a kitchen sink for 34 years. His own signature. The date, March 27th, 1990. His hand went to his throat. "Where did you—" "It was addressed to a woman named Joelle," Sloan said, in the careful voice her mother had used when she was being precise. "A graduate student at Emory. She was 26. You signed it the morning after your daughter was born. You walked past the nursery to sign it. The settlement said you would never contact her again. You kept that promise." The silence in the room was the kind you can hear in your own chest. She reached into her bag again and pulled out the envelope. Her mother's letter, the one in the careful handwriting. She unfolded it. She read it aloud, every word, the 11 hours of labor, the way the nurse had laid the baby on Joelle's chest, the way the elevator doors had closed, the way the letters had never been answered. When she finished, she did not raise her voice. "I am Sloan. I am your daughter. I am the new CEO of the company your father founded by selling segregated contracts to the state of Georgia. And I have spent 34 years earning the right to sit in this chair." The chairman set down his pen. One of the directors pressed both hands flat against the table as though bracing for an earthquake. A paralegal outside the door, sensing something she could not name, quietly closed the blinds. Nathaniel did not speak. There was nothing in his mouth anymore. The man who had signed a check to make his daughter disappear was watching his daughter dismantle him with the same precise, surgical patience with which he had walked out of a delivery room 3 decades earlier. His eyes flooded, his shoulders folded. The portrait of a dynasty collapsed, very quietly, into a single fragile frame on a single walnut chair. Catherine called him from the car. He did not pick up. She called twice more. She drove straight to her sister's house in Savannah. Within the hour, the board convened an emergency session. By 6 that evening, they had voted to place Nathaniel on administrative leave, pending a full investigation into his failed acquisitions and his role in covering up regulatory exposure. The same failures the new CEO had spent 91 minutes laying out on the table. By midnight, his counsel had begun discussions about a voluntary separation. By the following Monday, every major news outlet in the South had carried some version of the story. And the man who had walked out of a delivery room to save his career was walking out of his own company for the same reason. He had built his dynasty on the bones of an institution he had also betrayed. Sloane did not destroy him. She simply opened the file and let the weight of it speak for itself. He never got the chance to ask her forgiveness. In the months that followed, Nathaniel Caldwell would attempt it 3 times. By letter, by attorney, by a trembling 45-minute phone call she took at 6 in the morning from her office. Sloane listened to all 3. She did not refuse him. She did not accept him. She answered in the only words her mother had ever needed. Truth has a longer memory than fear. The check is still framed on her office wall. The letters are still folded in their box. Her mother's handwriting is still a quiet, living thing across her wrist. And somewhere in the long, slow arithmetic of what was owed and what was paid, a daughter who had been written out of her own father's story wrote herself, very carefully, back into the only record that ever mattered. You cannot outrun what you abandoned. It will find a chair at your table. It will sit across from you at your own reckoning. And whether it chooses to forgive you, destroy you, or simply outlast you is not a decision you will ever get to make. Has there been a moment in your life where a person you thought had forgotten you came back to change everything? Your career, your family, your understanding of who you were? Tell us in the comments. Share this story with someone who needs to hear tonight that silence always has a cost. And we will see you in the next one.